our live podcast, episode 32. So, what are we really going to get into today? Well, you guys already seen the video where I broke down the reassembly of the front brakes. What you guys didn't see was the teardown process and kind of how to inspect some of these parts. So that's what today's video is going to be based on, is we're going to look at those parts and those components, get more in depth with them, make sure that everything is in good working order before we put it back together. Because if it isn't in good working shape, we don't want to put this back together. So our main goal is going to be to get this side tore down. Guys, I do want to let you know, let's go ahead and get into the announcements. But what I wanted to let you guys know here is that I am branching out on other media sites. So if you guys do follow on other sites, please check me out over there. Make sure you guys like, follow, subscribe, ring the notification bell if they have one. Again, here, YouTube, you guys are my main community, so I try to bring you guys the content first, usually at about 1 o'clock on Sundays. So we are going live a little bit earlier, about a minute or two earlier, but it's all right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to get into this brake replacement. What we want to do is find a good place to position our jack, and then we're going to begin taking the wheel off, taking apart the caliper. Once we pull the caliper apart, we can slide the pads out, and then we can take the rotor off and take a look at that rotor. Now, I do know that this vehicle did have warped rotors when I got the vehicle, so this repair is pretty necessary. If you guys missed the video where I did the reassembly, you guys also saw a performance upgrade that I did on these brakes, and it really has made a world of difference when it comes to how these brakes function. So let me grab a few more things, clear some things out of the way. I'm going to show you guys where to position that jack so that you can jack your car up safely to be able to get the wheel off. I'm going to go ahead and set my chat here quick for you guys. There we go. So before I go popping this wheel off, what we want to look at is where are we going to place our jack? Where is the safest place to put the jack? Now, every vehicle is different. If you have a pickup that has a full frame on it, you want to jack on the frame of the truck, not on suspension components. Sometimes you will jack on suspension components if you have to, but it's not necessarily the best way to go. The best is to make sure that you're on a solid frame so that the vehicle won't move or wiggle. Also, I highly suggest putting a jack stand underneath it. Even if you keep the weight on the jack itself, make sure you place that jack stand so that if the jack does slowly come down, or if it were to drop suddenly, it will land on that jack stand and it'll keep it from falling on you. That is extremely important for this process. So I'm going to get you guys down. We're going to take a look at where we're going to put this jack. So on this car, there is a spot to jack right underneath here, and it's where many panels meet together. So usually when we're placing a jack, we want to find a spot where we have 4 or 5 different layers of metal that are welded together. This is your strongest point. Now remember, as the car ages, areas like this can get extremely rusty, so putting a jack here may not be the safest bet. You might have to go in farther where the trailing arm connects underneath the vehicle. Oftentimes that will be the strongest, because if that trailing arm breaks, the vehicle is pretty much junk already, because you can't fix that part of it without tearing everything apart and re-welding it back together. Okay, so I got the spot where it's supposed to be jacked up. Again, my rocker panels are good, so I can use this spot to jack up my car. Okay, so I always do a double check to make sure that everything is good, that I'm not wrecking anything, and that it's not actually crushing the rocker in. Because when you place the jack in a bad spot, it will actually press the metal up in. If you're on a floorboard usually only has one piece of metal on it, so it will poke through if you try to jack up on a floorboard. Again, you want to focus on spots that would be considered frame. A lot of times you want to look for the suspension components. Again, look for that trailing arm. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take this off. Now our first inspection is going to be on the lug nuts. Let me get these off and I'll explain exactly why you inspect these lug nuts. Okay, so our first inspection are these lug nuts. Now these are horrible design. GM did the absolute worst thing when they put a chrome cap over their actual lug nut. So the actual lug nut is right here. The cap, you can see the ring right there. This is a cap. This is not a one-piece lug nut. We will be replacing this with one-piece lug nuts. So I will not be reusing these. Here's one example of that one-piece lug nut. There is no ring here. This is all one piece. I don't have to worry about this ever having the cap fall off. If the cap falls off, this gets to be kind of a hassle to fix, and it's not a huge deal. But it can be extremely annoying if you don't catch it and you put a socket on it and you round this off. Rounding this off can be a problem. Sometimes you almost have to torch them out, or you have to take a smaller socket and pound it onto the lug nut. I don't like doing that because I know what that means to do that. Oftentimes you're either damaging the socket or you could potentially damage the stud when you do that, and then you might have to change out the studs as well. If you apply a lot of heat to a stud, wheel stud, make sure you change out your wheel studs. Don't reuse them, because what will happen is the tensile strength of that stud is gone, and when you put the new lug nut on it, you'll actually start pulling that lug nut or that thread apart, and it'll actually snap on you later on, and you don't want to lose these going down the road because your wheel will fall off. Got two chats. What is in that, or what is that, a 82 or 528i? Are you talking like the vehicle? Because this is a Chevy Malibu. That does look like BMW numbers there. I could be wrong, but let me know what you're trying to say there. Rick. Yeah, one of my girls' caps fell off, and it's just open lug nuts. Okay, so on those, you'll have, some of them will just have a cap. They won't have exposed lug nuts like this. You could run it that way. That cap is only cosmetic, so it's not really meant to do anything really important. A good example of that one is right here on the Silver Swine. This is pretty much a cap around here. Even though these are the lug nuts, you cannot take these lug nuts off without taking this cap off. So, yeah, GM is notorious for putting caps over the top of lug nuts. They think that it protects the lug nuts better, but really what happens is if you don't pay attention and retorque your wheels when you're supposed to, having those caps is actually a bad thing. The GMC Jimmy Crimson Vortec that's on the channel, I do have caps on that one, and I always double check, and I don't put my caps on until I've retorqued after 100 miles, because they get covered up, and unless you know what to listen for when you're going down the road, whether or not one of these come off and start banging around in that cap, you won't know it until the wheel falls off. So again, those caps, cosmetic wise, they look nice, yes. But as far as functionality and making sure that you can keep your vehicle safe, probably not the best design. I do like more of the aftermarket style wheels. We are potentially looking at some aftermarkets for the Silver Swine, which is our 04 Toyota Tacoma. When we do that, that's going to be a whole tire, rim, valve stem, everything, rebalance. That'll be all in that video, how to go about all of that stuff. So now that we have this off, our next thing that we're going to inspect is our wheel. And what we're looking for on our wheels to make sure that we haven't lost any wheel weights. Oftentimes, as the vehicle is moving, it may lose wheel weights over time. This is kind of a good time to just do a visual inspection. Also check the tire, make sure the tire's not cracked, that the tread is good, make sure the rim's not damaged in any weird spots. Now this one, they did do the glue-in weights, so if my glue-in weights are all missing, they're not all missing, and I do have some, but they did peel some off and leave some glue behind. We may or may not go after trying to clean that up. I might decide to do that in a different video too, who knows. But now that we've got the wheel off, what we're going to do is look at suspension components first. The reason I do the suspension components before I start taking brakes apart, because if I notice something weird that I'm going to have to fix some suspension, I will just stop at this point rather than tearing into the brakes, because it's going to kind of defeat the purpose. Some of the stuff we would have to take apart anyway if we'd be doing a wheel bearing, or even some of the control arms. If the brakes are in the way, you're going to be pulling the brakes back off to fix those control arms. So it's important to check your suspension components first before you start doing the brake teardown. Rick, you're doing a brake job. Yes, this is a brake job on a 2012 Malibu LT. So you'll have a lot of similar components no matter what the car is. You're going to have calipers, rotors, pads. Rick, I don't know if you saw the video that kind of led up to this one. I want to say it was episode 28 or no, it would have been 29 or 30. That one I did the reassembly process. So in this video, I'm not going to get into the reassembly of these brakes. This is on the rear of the vehicle. So this is more of the teardown and what to inspect when you're doing your teardown. A lot of people will just go in, slap the pads, slap the rotors, won't pay attention to anything, and then they wonder when they go down the road why all of a sudden their vehicle starts fishtailing in the rear. Oftentimes that is a control arm issue that they didn't notice when they did the brake job, and they could have caught it at that time. So that's really what I'm trying to drive home in this video, guys, is that inspection, inspection, inspection. If something don't look right, stop what you're doing, focus on that thing that's broken, get that fixed before you do anything else, because there is a lot of danger when you're talking about a rear suspension setup and it starts failing. A lot of people will lose control of their vehicle when the rear suspension starts getting squirrely on them. They won't know how to drive out of that or how to ease out of it. They'll want to punch the brakes and bring it to a stop right away. And the initial reaction when a suspension component fails and it's doing that is that it wants to bring that rear end around. So it's going to want to spin that vehicle around when a suspension component in the rear fails. Doing your brakes is a great time to get in and look at your whole suspension. We're talking springs, any control arms. This one's got an upper control arm and a front trailing arm. So we're going to be looking at both of those. We're also going to look at the shocks. Now, I do know that this thing needs shocks pretty bad. That will be a winter project when I get around to it. I do have to order all those components, and they are a few $100s. But I'm going to order a full strut and shock setup when I do this one, and depending on how the suspension setup and works in here, I might do some slight suspension modifications, such as maybe some spring cuts to be able to drop it down a little bit. I don't want it full ride height under a normal suspension. That does consume more fuel, but if I can keep it where it is now, that's going to be ideal. Let's take a look underneath the suspension, and I'll keep an eye on you guys' chats. Okay, so here we've got all of our suspension components. We actually have a trailing arm here, which is right down here. We have another one here, and we have a main trailing arm that holds the spring. So what we're looking for is any damage on the spring. This perch has a little bit of rust on it. We're going to be taking care of that this winter. We're going to be doing some undercoating on this, and we're going to be doing a durable undercoating. Usually a bed liner is the best way to go. But our spring looks really good. Our brake lines look good, except for there's a little bit of rust on this one. So if I ever have to replace this, I'm better off coming up here and replacing this line with the caliper if I have to do that. Now again, that's not going to be my first goal here. Today is just pad and rotor replacement. Next, we're looking at shocks. We do have a very crusty shock right there. I don't want to scrape at it too much because I don't want this thing to start leaking. But shocks are going to have to be replaced in this thing. And this one, the perch is inside the vehicle. So this is inside, meaning I'm going to have to get into either the rear seat area of the car, so in here, or I'm going to have to go in through the trunk and reach in. I think it's going to be a lot harder to reach from there. Now, hopefully, it'll be nice and these will come apart. I'm going to be soaking these this winter when I stop driving this vehicle. I'm going to really soak these down to try to get those off. And then we're going to change out this shock along with the front struts. The front struts look like they're in about the same shape. Now, I do have some paint issues here, guys, that I will be doing some touch-ups on later on. Those are kind of things that we look for. Just how are our pinch welds holding up? How rusty is it getting? Are we getting any bubbly rust on the outside? You know, stuff like that. That's kind of all of the inspection. We also want to look at our spindle. So this one is going to be a rather large pain when it comes time to replacing this. This is aluminum. This is steel. That means these two components are not going to want to come apart very well. We're going to fight to get these out. I will probably wait to replace these unless I notice a problem during the winter time. If I notice a problem, then I'm going to go in and go after it and take some of this out. But this spindle is actually really large. I have not seen a large spindle like this in quite some time. This is a quite heavy-duty style spindle out here. And they probably did this because this was going to be GM's mid-size towing car. So let me cover what a mid-size towing car is for you guys quickly before I grab my wrenches and go after taking this apart. So a mid-size towing car means you could put a receiver hitch on it and pull a small trailer like a lawnmower trailer or something like that. Not designed to pull a boat by any means. This rear suspension is extremely weak and the shocks are extremely horrible. Anybody who has Malibus already knows that the rear shocks are trash. If you get 2 good years out of them, consider yourself lucky on a Malibu. Most of the time these shocks and struts fail a lot sooner than that. I am going to be looking at an upgrade when we do that this winter. As of right now, everything looks really good. My e-brake cable is in really good shape. I don't notice anything weird with that. I am going to put a little bit of spray on the cable. Let me show you guys that quick. Okay, our e-brake cable looks good. There's a little bit of rusting here, but I'm not too worried about that. Cable is in pretty good shape. It isn't cracked or destroyed at all. We are going to put a little bit of lube on this when we put this back together, just so that if we ever do have to apply the parking brake, we can not have to worry about that sticking or binding. But what we're going to need to do is get our wrenches now. This looks like it's going to be either a 14 or something like that. Then we're going to have to take our caliper brackets off. And we do have a slight issue here. Is going to be getting in here to get this one off. We might only be able to get in there with a wrench and tap it down in order to get this bracket loose. So this is our bracket. This is our caliper. Caliper is going to come off first. We're going to pull the pads, set this up out of the way. We're going to inspect the pads, and then we do want to inspect this bracket when we get it off. The only other thing that I look for is whether or not I have a set screw, usually a Phillips screw, that goes in and holds this rotor onto the vehicle. This one does not have one, thankfully. Usually if it does have one, I don't put that screw back in. The reason why that they do this is on the assembly line, the rotor could wind up having to sit on the vehicle for quite some time before they actually bolt the rim onto the vehicle. When they do that, they put that Phillips screw in it to hold the rotor as it's going down the assembly line. Once you leave the assembly line, you don't need that screw in there. As much as other people will argue with me on that, you don't need that Phillips screw in here once you've gone and taken it apart. Manufacturers put it on there so that the rotor stays on the vehicle as it goes down the assembly line. So let me grab my wrenches and we're going to get at taking this off. Okay, so as always, guys, you've seen me do this before. I use a hammer. We got some wrenches here. We're going to find the one that works. And then we're going to get this off. So 14 for the caliper bracket. So I place it here. I hold it with my finger, and then I just tap it down until it comes loose, and then I take it off by hand. Just like that, it's loose. Spin this off. As you're taking this apart, you're also checking threads, making sure that nothing got cross-threaded, making sure that nothing's damaged, that the bolt isn't bent. We're going to be checking these slides once we get this caliper off. Okay, so you see that this is starting to move around on me. So I'm just going to slide this back in. I'll go down finger tight so I can get it back off. I just don't want to go in partial on the threads, because if I go in partial, I can damage them while I'm trying to pop this one loose. Okay, so now that both are loose, I know that this caliper will come right off in my hand. I may have to compress it slightly, but it won't be horrible. And I have a C-clamp that I use to compress. I also have a piston pressing tool that I might use once we have it off. The piston tool that I have to actually compress this piston in works really good, but I don't necessarily need it. I'll be showing you guys some tricks to help you not have to use that. So one thing you want to be careful is that you don't pry on this too hard. Remember, you do have an e-brake here. So if it's not wanting to come free very easily, then just see if you can wiggle it off. Sometimes there'll be safety pins in here that won't allow you to wiggle it off. But now that we have it, we can lift it up. And it was a good thing I did not press this. This has a twist in. So I usually try it very lightly and see if it goes in. This one did not. There is a special tool that you need to turn that piston in. And I have the tool, so I will be grabbing that here shortly. And if that tool doesn't work, then there is other options that we can use. So these pads are kind of sticking in place. That tells me the last person that did this brake job, they didn't keep everything clean and it rusted really bad. Again, I live in the Rust Belt, so pretty typical. We're going to start seeing, you know, a lot of issues where pads will stick. And first inspection I'm doing here is seeing how much pad wear I have. You guys can see right here that there is some pad wear here, and it is shaving weird down to this side. That's not a good thing. We don't want to see this. When we have an angled cut to our pad like this, this tells us that our pads were starting to lock up in the brackets. We also might have slide issues. So next I'm going to check these slides. I just checked the top one here. I'm going to check this one. Okay, this one's sticky. So the bottom one here, this explains why our pad was shaved. This bottom one is sticky. So what it's doing is it's chewing it up. What I need to do now is get this off and see if I can free up this pin, clean that out really good, and I'm going to make sure I put a lot of grease in that one before I put it back together. One thing I'm going to do is pop my slides out. We'll take a quick look at these. You can see how much they're gummed up. This is why your pads stick and why your brakes drag. This can also have an impact on fuel mileage. So we are trying to check. This one's in actually really good shape. It's the bottom one that looked bad. And judging by the way that this pin was, that's why it was bad, is because it was grinding the pad the wrong way. We didn't want to keep grinding it like that. So what I'm going to do is move my caliper up out of the way for now. I do need to twist that caliper in, so at some point I will be doing that. Again, you always want to check to make sure you don't have an electronic caliper. You want to make sure that it's just a straight up mechanical. If it's electronic, there is a process that you have to do. Fords have a weird electronic caliper. And if you don't toggle your parking brake on and off the right way, it will actually damage a $2,000 caliper. So yeah, that you definitely want to avoid. So on this one, our 14 millimeter is actually too big. So it is the 13 millimeter for this. Now I'm going to use that same technique of just tapping this down to break these loose. Okay, once I know it's loose, I'm going to jump to the bottom one. So when I did my breakdown of the brake components, I had someone say, well, why don't you just measure the rotors and go off of the mil thickness of the rotors? Here's the thing. I've done so many brake jobs. I've done so much brake replacements that I can tell just by driving the vehicle how worn the rotors are and whether or not they should just straight up need to be replaced. The other thing is the added cost to mill them nowadays. It's literally the same price if you just bought new rotors. So if the rotors are bad, I just replace them. I don't even try to remill them. I just replace them and move on. So here's our bracket. We're going to inspect this in just a little bit. We're going to slide our rotor off. Here's our rotor. So this one was definitely due to being replaced. You guys can see where it wasn't making full pad contact here. There was an edge that wasn't catching at all, and there's a lot of rust buildup on this outer edge. This is a sign that our brakes were shot, that we needed to get in here and do this job. It's a well-needed and probably best time to do a job like this. Our outer side didn't look very bad. This actually looked pretty good. This is not good. This is horrible. This means that the pad was not fully biting when we pressed the brakes, and we weren't getting full braking pressure. If I would have stomped on the brakes, my front would have been doing a lot more of the stopping than the back, and I don't want that. So these are definitely shot. let's go ahead and take a look at this. So here's our bracket, and I'm turning these. So when you can twist these, this is a really good sign. You really want to be able to twist these if they are locked in place. This can become a really bad thing. Next, we want to pop these loose. So I'm going to go ahead and squish this boot down. And I want to slide this pin out. Now this one is sticky. This one doesn't want to slide out very well. And some of that is someone used the wrong grease. They used ball joint grease when they should have used a brake grease. I'm going to cover that grease here in just a second, guys. So that one came out. Let's go ahead and take this one out next. This one slides out real nice. But again, they've got axle grease on this. They've got ball joint grease. This is not what you use to grease these pins. This grease gets very thick and can actually cause the pads to stick into place, which is why we saw the one pad was shaved down. Before we jump out, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the rest of what we have going on here. Here's our wheel bearing. What we want to do is we want to lightly spin this around. We want to make sure there's no grinding or any spots where the wheel bearing feels like it's catching. So this one spins real easy. There's no issues here. Now, we are going to probably want to clean this up with a wire wheel the best we can so that when we put our new rotor on, it sits flush against the hub. Some people will not do that. Some people will just leave it alone. I usually will wire brush this at least. Even if I don't break out a grinder and clean this out perfectly, I will wire brush this to make sure there's nothing flaky that would cause that to bind or catch in a weird place. Okay, so let's go over what we're going to be doing with this caliper bracket. Because on a brake job, this is the most important thing that you need to clean up and make sure functions properly. If you do a brake job and you don't do maintenance with this, your brakes are not going to last. You're going to have pads that are going to wear out prematurely. They're going to bind. They're going to catch. They're going to do a whole lot of weird stuff that you're not going to want because you're going to have to replace your brakes a lot sooner. What we need to do is clean up all of these grooves in here. And how we do that is I take a cutoff wheel that I can get in there with an air tool. I clean this out really well. Now, I don't do it to grind or chop anything out. All I'm doing is trying to remove that flake layer of crust so that the slides sit down nice inside here. Once I've done this, the best thing to do would be to paint these. But a lot of people don't have that kind of time to let their vehicle sit down while they ceramic coat paint their brackets. So what I do is I will take a special grease that I use on brakes because it does not collect dust. Let me grab that for you because we are going to clean the pins and set up the pins for this bracket. And I want to do that before I go to the grinder with that. You guys got any chats? Chat them in now. Now would be a good time. I'll read them when I come back. Oh, all right. So I grabbed some stuff that I need. Check chats. Nope, nothing new right now. If you guys got any questions, chat them in down below. I'll see if I can help you. There are mechanics who also watch in from time to time. They're kind of my moderators. They'll make sure that I'm not saying anything I shouldn't be saying or that I don't lead you guys astray. I do get private messages from them guys, and yeah, if I mess something up or in a video or I'm thinking it but don't say it properly, they do correct me. So if you're looking to join and be part of the mod squad or wrench squad, let me know. I'll hit you up. I'll take a look at your YouTube page and see if you're able to help. If you are, cool. That's we're looking to build this community. That's what we're aiming for. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to clean those pins. And blue shop towels are the best way to do it. I just grab the pin and wipe it clean. Yeah, somebody used bearing grease. They did not use brake. I'm going to show you guys that brake grease here once I finish cleaning these up, because this brake grease is really important. This is what goes in the side of a wheel bearing or inside of a ball joint, not in your brakes. Wrong grease. The grease that goes on your brakes is either yellowish or clear colored, not black in color or red. That is for ball joints or tie rod ends or axle shafts, not brakes. So the grease that I use is this stuff right here, guys. If you guys watched my other video on the reassembly, you guys saw me use this. This is what you use. It's called Sil Glide. It's going to read backwards for you guys. I apologize. But it's Sil Glide. It has a picture of brakes on it. The reason that we use this is this does not collect dust. Dust on brakes causes a lot of brake failure issues, especially if you drive on gravel roads. I do not put this on the pads because I only have the slide and the pad riding against each other. I do put this under the slides, and the slides are the ones we pulled off right here. So underneath where this sits onto the bracket. When we grind that clean, I will put this on there to keep the rust from building up underneath this shim and pushing the shim up. When it pushes this shim up, it binds the pad. That is bad. We don't want any binding of those pads. We want them to float freely and move very easily. We don't ever want them to catch or bind. And if we add a bunch of grease in there, all we're doing is giving it a potential that a rock or anything could get caught in there or wedged in there. On those, the slides are best left onto the pads with no lubrication. Now, if you want, you can add a little bit of I hate saying this, guys, because I don't like recommending people using WD-40 on their brakes, because if they mess up and spray the rotors, your pads are useless. But if you can get a little bit of spray onto the slides, it allows the pads to stay moving freely without binding or catching. The only issue is you run into a bunch of problems if it gets onto the rotor or soaks into the pad. Those pads have to stay clean against the rotor. You cannot put any grease, oils, or contaminants on the rotor or on the pads. If you guys seen some of the TikToks where people smeared anti-seize all over their rotor, they basically destroyed not only the rotor but the pads as well. They could never use those again. They could never drive that vehicle again. Those surfaces have to remain perfectly clean, no exceptions. So now that we've got the pins clean, before we go putting any grease in there, I need to clean some of this out because this had that axle grease in it. So usually I'll get a can that I have a spray nozzle and I'll just stick it down in there. I'll spray a bunch in there and I'll let it soak for a bit. Once I do that, I will grab a clean towel and then dump it out into the towel because I want to see what comes out of there. Okay, so we did get some stuff that came out. There was a little bit of chunks in there as well. That tells me that there's definitely some stuff in there. So leaving this in there for a little bit is not going to hurt anything. Plus, when we go to put our grease in it, it's not going to make much of a difference, really. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tip this upside down now, and I'm really going to just go to town. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to spray this clean to where nothing dark comes out. Okay? So once it's done that, I shake it. And brake parts cleaner, dries pretty well. Here's one issue with brake parts cleaner. Avoid getting it on paint. No matter what the painted surface is, brake parts cleaner is extremely harsh and will remove paint. That is not good. You do not want that. So while these are drying, I'm going to now switch over and I'm going to grease up these pins. That's not going to make a bit of difference for the last part that we have to do on this video. The last part is we need to clean up this bracket, and I need to show you guys how to do this because this is a necessary part to doing your brake job. And you guys didn't see this in the last video because I didn't show it because my grinder is really noisy. So I'm only going to show you guys on one of these little posts because I try not to make extreme amount of noise, such as running an impact, running my air compressor. That stuff gets really loud on camera. So I try not to do that. But in this case, I do need to show you guys this step when we get there. This is our grease. We're going to put a little bit onto the pins. We don't want to get super carried away here, but we do want to put some on it. This pin was on the bottom, so I do have to remember that this was my bottom pin. So I put a little dab on my finger, and I just spread it with the glove. And I usually fill up the little tip on the end. There's a little tip there, a little divot. I fill that up before I stick it in there because that will help spread it all the way to the end where the slides are. That way I know I have good grease in there. So this is the right grease. Don't use stuff out of a grease gun for tie rod ends and stuff like that. That's not the right grease. That will lock up your brakes and wreck your brakes prematurely. Okay, so now that I got this on there, what I can do is I can start sliding these pins in. And sometimes I'll slide them in and out a few times, and if it doesn't feel right, what I'll do is I'll respray everything, re-wipe it down, re-everything. Okay, that one feels really good. A little bit of grinding. So what I'm doing is I'm just going to work this pin in a bit with the new grease. When they're this bad, sometimes I will actually reapply grease and I'll lay it on pretty thick like this. The point of doing it this way is if you're noticing a lot of grinding, that can be just from a rust buildup in there. And the more grease and stuff you put in there, the more it kind of frees everything up and cleans it up. Gets it to slide nice and easy. You want this to have some rebound to it. You don't want it to be bound up tight. You want it to be able to move freely. Because when you first put your pads in, it's going to be all the way in the down position. So you're going to want to make sure you press it all the way down and wiggle it in. Make sure it moves freely and nothing's bound up. So what I had is I had a bunch of like debris on it from doing that. So I'm actually pulling the pin back out. I'm going to re-grease this pin and then slide it back in yet again. This is part of the inspection that you're doing on your caliper brackets. If your caliper brackets are bad, it's better to just replace them than it is to try to fight them. Okay, so we've got one pin in. The important thing is that we know that these all slide properly. We're going to go ahead and clean up this last one. So after we did the brake cleaner in there, got everything sprayed out really nice, we still may have a little bit of contamination going on in there. So normally what we'll do is we'll take and run our pin in after we've greased it up with the proper grease. Again, this stuff, Sil Glide. Use Sil Glide on your brakes. Not what comes out of your grease gun that you use for tie rod ends and ball joints and stuff like that. That's not the right grease. So what we're doing is we're running these in, making sure that grease gets everywhere that it needs to go and that nothing is bound up, caught up. When we're ready, we want to make sure that our rubber boot attaches to our pins. So this one's attached and this one slides really nice. So this one has a rubber tip on the end. This one is the weird pin, and it's important to know where your pins are when you take them out in relation to each other. This one here was definitely more sticky, and if I think this is still sticking, I'm going to pull it back out one more time and we're going to clean it and then re-grease it. Okay. One more time with this pin, we're going to re-grease this. So I'd like to say thank you guys for all your support. Continue hitting the like button, the subscribe button, ring the notification bell so you guys get notified when I go live. It's usually every Sunday. I aim for the 1 o'clock hour here on YouTube, and then I switch over to another site that I cannot mention that name because they are a direct competitor, but they are known as the Mean Green website, if you guys catch my drift. I will be going live for my first time over there today after I get done with this video. So, and that one I'm going to be doing the complete brake job on that one because that is my first video over there. So I'm just going to show it from start to finish. So this is really good. This spins nice and free, not catching or binding. This one's the same thing. This is perfect. This is what we want. We want our bracket nice and clean. We don't want to have any issues or binding or anything sticking here. This is where those pads got wore at an uneven level because what happened was the one pad stuck. So the one pad stuck down here and it started grinding the pad as he kept applying the brakes. This could also have a negative impact on your fuel mileage. If this is dragging, meaning that it's keeping pressure on that pad constantly, it's going to take your fuel mileage and just drop it in the toilet. Because what happens is you're going to have a constant drag on your rotors. The other issue that you're going to have, which is why I don't measure the mill thickness on these, because if they did do that and this is from it dragging unevenly, this rotor is warped and it's not worth remilling it, because it's just not safe. After a while, these things get down there, and honestly, for how much they cost, I would just replace them. I really would. They're not worth the risk, they're not worth the hassle, and they're not worth the time to take them back apart. They're really not. So, what we have left to do, guys, if you got any chats, get them in now while we're at this point. I will be going over some news stuff here towards the tail end of this video. I always save the news for the end, guys, just because of censorship issues. Some of the issues I talk about in the news can be hot topic issues, especially with some of the EV stuff going on, especially with some of the recall stuff going on. You're going to want to make sure you stay tuned for the news on this one, guys. There's some big recall stuff that I need to let you guys know on the news. So, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick recap here with you guys of everything that we inspect, and then we're going to get into grinding this bracket. Once we grind this bracket, the physical part of this video is pretty much done, but I do want to do a rundown quickly of what the components are that we're checking. I do this for a couple of different reasons, in case people come in later and they didn't see the beginning. And I also do this because I do make reels, that I will make a reel out of this later on. So let's go ahead and get into that. Okay, so when we are first taking our brakes apart, there are things that we're going to inspect. We're going to start with the most easiest, which are the lug nut covers or lug nuts. GM has these stupid covers. I am going to be replacing mine with a one-piece solid, so I do not have those covers that fall off, and then I can't get my lug nuts off without pounding a socket on, which I hate. Next, once we've removed the wheel, we're going to go ahead and check the flanges. We're going to check the wheel itself. We're going to check the rim and the weights. We want to make sure that the weights are still on that. Next, we're going to come over and we're going to check our suspension components, like our spring, any of our trailing arms. This one's got 4 different trailing arms. It's got one here, a short one. It's got a little longer one here, and then it's got the main trailing arm that holds the spring. Then it also has a front leading arm that has a shock attached to it. This shock is bad, and I will need to replace that, but that will be a winter project. Next, we go ahead and we take our caliper off. As we take our caliper off, we do want to be careful because sometimes we don't know what kind of piston we have. We have to pay attention to this so that we get the right tools on this to be able to turn this back into place. Some of these are a press-in, so sometimes you can compress these in, but this one is a turnstile. So I will need to turn that one in. Next, we will take the rotor off. And once we take the rotor off, we're looking for anything weird that might have happened to the rotor. And something weird that can happen to a rotor is this side looks perfectly normal. This side is shot. As you can see, it wasn't riding here on the pad, so I wasn't making full brake contact. And it was probably getting very hot right where my thumb is here, meaning that it was riding here but not making full contact with this rotor. I would not reuse this rotor. Some people would say, why don't you just turn it and reuse it? I don't like reusing rotors, plus I'm doing a brake upgrade. That brake upgrade is to a drilled and slotted rotor. The reason for that is I want to have a lot better stopping pressure, and I want to know I can bring this car to a dead stop if I need to in a hurry. So why would I need to bring a car to a dead stop really quickly? Well, let's ask ourselves a couple of those questions. You could be in a high city traffic environment where you may have to stomp on your brakes really hard and come to an immediate stop because there was an accident in front of you. You want the confidence to know that that vehicle is going to come to a dead stop when you need it to. The other reason that you would go with that is, like, let's say you're out in the country setting. You could have deer or anything else that jump out of the road ditch, and you would need to stop really quickly to avoid wrecking your car. Having good quality brakes makes all the difference when it comes to that. There is no second guessing. There is no way to really get around that situation. It is best to know that you have the confidence to stop. Inspecting your components before you start taking things apart is the easiest way to ensure that you're going to be able to bring that vehicle to a stop when the time comes. Again, knowing that you've inspected these components gives you kind of a peace of mind as well. Oftentimes you'll want to wiggle them or pull on them to make sure that they're nice and solid. Again, make sure the vehicle is stable on a jack stand or positioned in a spot that it won't fall. If you're going to wiggle those suspension components, you don't want anything to fall on you. All right, for the last part, let's go ahead and go over and clean up this bracket. Now, this bracket is really important to know how to clean this up. And if you do it right, it will really come out really nice, and you guys will have a good setup when it comes to reinstallation. So I always clean every bracket. I don't take the chance. I don't just call it good enough. I clean every single bracket. The reason why is it does add to brake life. And the reason it adds to brake life is because the pads will not get locked up inside that bracket. How I do that is with this tool right here, a simple cutting wheel. And the reason I use a cutting wheel is I can get in there and kind of shave that down and clean some of that rust and buildup out. If you're wearing headphones, I'm going to issue you a headphone warning at this time. It might be a good idea to turn off your headset because this does get a little loud. I'll get you guys in here so you can see exactly what I'm doing. Okay, we're going to go away from the air compressor here for a little bit. I don't want to have that noise going too much here, but I'm going to try to hold off until that air compressor is done. And then I'll show you guys exactly what I was doing. If you guys got any chats, now's the time to do it while I'm waiting for this thing to quiet down. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and mute it until this thing's done. Okay, so now my air compressor's done. Let's go ahead and cover what we were just doing here, the reason that we do this. So you guys can see this one is nice and shiny and clean. There's no rust buildup. There's nothing flaking underneath here. When I put the slides on this now, it's going to sit down completely flush to where the pads are not going to be binding. If you have a lot of flaky rust buildup, even though you put the new shims on, what can happen is the pads will lock into the caliper, and it won't allow those pads to slide back and forth freely. This is kind of the big issue when it comes to doing brakes, is this can deter you from having a good, successful brake job just because you didn't get this bracket clean. Once I've gone and ground this down, I will put that Sil Glide brake grease on here, because what it'll do is help keep rust out of here for the time being. Now, you will always have to clean these up on every brake job. It's just the way that these are. If you grind them too many times or you go through too many sets of brakes, you will need to replace this bracket because your pads cannot be moving up and down in this bracket. If they move up and down like this bracket is shot. Usually when this is shot, it is time to replace your caliper. And that's a good thing to know, because a lot of people will not check that when they do that. They will just assume that it's good to go and they'll just let it ride that way, and that's really, really not good. You want to make sure that your pads are not jumping up and down. People have complained about brake rattle issues because their pads are actually moving up and down inside this bracket. That means you've done too many brake jobs and it's time to replace your brackets because your brackets are wore out. So something to know when you guys are doing that. This is the tool that we will use to turn that piston in. And how we do that is we use our ratchet. We use I'm just going to assume I need a longer extension. So I'll use an extension and my ratchet and this tool. And I'll need to pick out the right one that fits in there by the way it looks. This one would probably work the best because it's kind of is into that rounded tip. So I will slide this onto the block. Put this on my ratchet, and now I'm good to go ahead and twist that piston down. We're going to go ahead and do that because there's one last inspection thing that you want to do when you do this. This inspection process is super important. If you don't pay attention to what you're doing here, you will actually damage that piston. Okay, so here we are. This is our caliper. We're going to go ahead and place our block in there. See if I got it right the first time. Okay, nope, that wasn't right, so we're going to switch it out. We'll go to this one. Okay, it turned, but it seems to be turning hard. So part of the inspection here is taking our time to see which way to turn this. Okay. Okay, so this bottomed all the way out now. We turn this down. I am going to try a few more times to kind of bottom this out. Your new pads sit up really high, so you do have to really kind of turn these down in there and to make sure that it goes all the way in. And if you don't get it the first time, you can always come back and turn it down as long as you know which way to turn it. But putting in new pads, it does got to be all the way down. So it's getting there. We can start seeing it. See that it's still sticking up a little bit. We got to get this all the way down. Okay, so I felt it bottom out to where it wouldn't go anymore. That's how far down I want to go. I want to make sure that it's as flush to this as I can get it because I am putting in brand new pads. I don't want to have issues when I'm trying to slide this back together that it binds when I'm trying to press it onto the caliper. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the news portion of this today, guys. So this week on the news side of things, we saw a whole bunch of problems in the Ford camp, and GM had a controversy all on their own. So let's cover the first one here. The first one is the controversy with Ford is they are telling 775,000 Ford owners of the early 2000s models, Mustangs, the Ford Rangers, and the Ford Explorers to not drive their vehicles. They are calling for a nationwide stop driving. The reason for this is the airbags have a fatal flaw in them, meaning that the airbags can go off and you're not in an accident and it causes metal shrapnel to go through the interior. This is a huge safety issue. Unfortunately, this might call for a lot of vehicles being taken off the road of that year. What I can advise you, well, I can't even really advise you guys this. There are ways around that airbag issue. If you choose to find the solution, we can go ahead and talk about it, but I definitely can't show you how to bypass that system. But there are ways around that whole issue. Dean, why not recall them? So what they're doing is they're offering a stop drive and recall, meaning that they're going to go ahead and tell you to bring it into the dealer. They're going to make you leave the vehicle there until they get the recalled parts replaced. Unfortunately, with that many vehicles being affected, in order for you to get that recall processed, it's going to take a ton of time, meaning you're not going to have your vehicle for a lot of the time that you're going to need it. Unfortunately, that's going to put you in a position that they're going to try to talk you into buying a newer vehicle. Again, I've already called out dealerships on this particular issue already because they like to do the bait and switch when people come in for recall warranty stuff. They use that as a chance to try to leverage that person into buying a new car. This also puts you in a spot because you're going to need your car. Most people don't have a backup, so they need their car. And when they shut this down, they're going to force you to want to make a move really quickly to buy a different car, so you've got wheels to go back and forth to work. I do have multiple vehicles, so I wouldn't really have to worry about that, but there's also ways around the whole airbag recall issue. Again, guys, look into it. If you guys choose to do it, make sure you're being safe about it. But there are ways around to where that airbag will not go off. Again, if you get involved in a crash, though, it could be really bad. And if you take it to a mechanic shop to get any work done, they're going to refuse to do the work because your airbag lights are on. So just know that those are always the complications, but there is a workaround for it. If you guys want me to talk about it more, private message me, please, and I can get into it a little bit more with you. But I will not do it on a video because that's not good. It's not safe to do that. But for some people that are in a very tough spot and cannot afford to buy another car or have their dealer keep their car, I'm going to try my best to help people out in that aspect. Next is the GM debacle. GM, you guys crossed the line. What happened was GM decided that they were going to sell driver information that was uploaded from all of their vehicles and sell it to insurance companies. Insurance companies are then using that to dictate nationwide insurance rates for drivers, meaning that we are now getting charged for what other people do on the road. It doesn't even really pertain to us anymore. It pertains to the society as a whole, what they're doing based on the information that they have from GM. Texas is filing a massive lawsuit against GM for selling this private information because this is private to the driver driving the car. They were never notified. They were never told that this was going to happen. So bad on GM's part. You guys stepped way out of line on this one. As far as news, guys, those are the two big news topics. There is one more kind of sad news that pertains to circle track racers. You guys, Scott Bloomquist was a huge circle track guy who racked up over 600 wins in his 40-year career. He died in a plane crash, I believe, on Thursday. So the circle track community is really kind of feeling the loss of this one. It's been a tough year for racers all around. There's been horrific crashes. There has been controversy on racetracks. There has been the loss of circle track driver, drag racer, Lizzie Musey, and John Force having his bad crash. So it's been one of the years to remember when it comes to everything motorsports. It's really kind of shown that this industry, as much as we try to take safety precautions, it's not necessarily safe. Plus, sometimes people do get sick outside of the industry as well. So it's tough to stay healthy, stay active in this community, and be able to do this for a long period of time. A lot of the chemicals we deal with are very toxic, and they can have long-lasting effects later on. You guys saw me today. I was wearing gloves. Normally, I would not wear gloves, but I'm choosing to take my health a little bit more seriously. Not super serious, but enough that I'm choosing to protect myself. I know that brake dust is not good for you. And older brake systems, those may have asbestos brake pads. So try not to bang the pads around or breathe in any dust. When you see people rubbing the pads and slapping them together, don't do that, especially not in a closed space. Even if it's an organic pad, it still has metal fragments and everything else in it. You do not want that dust in your lungs. It's really bad for you. Guys, I want to say thank you for all your support. As always, guys, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and ring that notification bell so you guys know when I go live. It's every Sunday at about 1 p.m. here on YouTube. I'm going to do a little bit. I'm probably going to finish up this side, and then I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the Mean Green website. So if you guys have that one, check me out over there. It'll be my first podcast there today. That one I may have to record and then upload, so that one may not go live until tonight. But check me out over there if you guys get a chance. And always, thank you guys for all your support. Continue hitting the like, the follow, and the subscribe buttons, ringing that notification bell, and I'll see you guys next time.